Well, it is a pleasure to be here, pleasure to see all you guys and to be a part of this. I'm honored to be asked to be here. I want to just throw this out there real quick. To the teens in the class, this is your class. I'm glad to have adults in here, but I want to tell you, this is your class. I want to hear your voices. So when I have questions, and I want it to be give and take, and I'm going to have to kind of watch the time because give and take can sometimes take more time. But I want it to be your class. So when I have questions, please don't be afraid to raise your voice. I want to hear from you guys. But we're going to be in Matthew chapter 7. So if you have your Bible, go ahead and open to that text. And of course, you guys know this. Most of you might know this. But Matthew 5, 6, and 7, what is that typically called? What do people call those three chapters? Sermon on the Mount, right? So we're in Matthew chapter 7, and Jesus is here going to be wrapping up the Sermon on the Mount. Now, we're not going to get to the very end of his sermon, but in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus is going to talk about something that is extremely relevant today. You know, we live in a society where, how many of you guys have ever said this or heard this said, don't judge me. You don't have a right to judge me. You ever said that? I remember one time, my dad was an elder in the church, and I remember when I was a teenager and thought you guys probably do know it all. You probably do, but I thought I did, and I did not know it all when I was a teenager. So I remember thinking I knew it all, and I was a pretty good boy overall, and I went to Bible class faithfully, and, I was relatively knowledgeable as far as a teenage person goes in the Bible. And I remember one time I was mad at my dad, and I was arguing with him, and he's saying stuff, and I thought he was being judgmental. I said, the Bible says don't judge, Dad. Thought I just burned him, like burn you, Dad. So that's what I said. I thought that's what the Bible says, don't judge. And I was thinking, I can even open the Bible and show you where it says it. How many of you guys are familiar with that text in Matthew chapter 7? How many of you have thought, I'm going to tell Dad, don't judge me, Dad? Have you guys ever done that? Am I the only one who ever told your dad that? Don't judge me, Dad. Has anybody else ever done that? Yes, Samuel, right? Samuel and I are the only ones who have told our dad, don't judge me, Dad. But in Matthew chapter 7, Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, really Jesus is talking about what does it look like to live for the kingdom? What does it look like to live for the kingdom of Christ? And in fact, he doesn't just, it would be a hard thing. Can you imagine if you're trying to live right and there's these people that are so religious appearing and Jesus comes on the scene and says, you have to live more holy than the preachers and the elders. You have to live more holy than that. It'd be like, what? They're the holy ones, right? I mean, I don't know if we're the holy ones or not, but that's what people think. But at the time, in Matthew chapter 5, verse 20, we're not going to be there. But Jesus tells his followers, he says, you have to have more righteousness than the scribes and the Pharisees. And so from Matthew chapter 5, verse 20, we have this call to righteousness that goes through the whole Sermon on the Mount. So we're going to talk this morning about righteous judgment. I want to ask a question. What does it mean to judge? You guys tell me, what does it mean to judge? My wife says I talk too much, and she says sometimes you need to let people think about your question. So, hun, I'm going to let people think about the question. What does it mean to judge?
It kind of means to, I guess in a way it means to put someone on a rate. Like, if you drive past someone and say, well, I think they're going to go to this place instead of there, or you tell them they're doing it wrong.
Okay, tell somebody they're doing something wrong. I mean, we all kind of do judgy things all the time, right? Back in my day, there used to be a shoe place called Payless Shoe Stores. How many of you guys remember that place? I thought, because we were poor, I thought growing up, that's where the cool kids got their shoes. I found out later on that's where the kids who don't have no money got their shoes. Like everybody else was wearing Nike, and I'm like, well, I got Pro Wings. I thought I was better than them because I had Pro Wings. And I was looking down on all those losers with Nike. But the truth of the matter is there is judgment sometimes when we look at people and we see how they dress and we judge them. We see how someone has a hairstyle and we judge them. We see just various things. We make these observations and we then say, okay, here's what I'm observing. And now I'm going to make a judgment based off what I'm observing. Okay, here's this guy. I don't know you. What's your name right here in green shirt? Aaron. So I'm looking at Aaron. I'm seeing what he's selling there, and I'm like, okay. So now I'm like, I'm either gonna I might think this if I'm judging. I'm better than Aaron. I'm not though, Aaron. Or I might say I'm worse than Aaron, right? But judgment is this idea of making a choice, a decision based off what you observe. And so it can be used in a negative sense. That's usually what we're talking about, right? To find fault in someone, to condemn someone. So I want to ask you this question, just really basic question. Is it wrong to judge? I've kind of set it up a little bit, so the answer should be kind of obvious. But is it wrong to judge? Okay.
Depends on context.
Okay, depends on the context. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's judging based off of, like, you're going to hire someone for a job. You're judging if they're good for that job. And then there's judging where you're putting yourself as the arbitrator of what is right and wrong for that person.
Okay, so being the arbitrator of what's right and wrong for that person. So let me ask this question then. So you're kind of saying there are times to judge. So when is it appropriate to judge? When is it like, okay, when is it appropriate? When is it inappropriate?
Well, in a way back before a lot of the things we have today, there would be a judge and they would judge people off crimes that they would do. That is an appropriate way to judge someone.
Okay, so legally we still have judges, right? Judges make decisions. So anybody else, when is it appropriate to judge? Let's go to the other side. When is it inappropriate to judge? Okay, let me ask this question. I brought up the Pro Wings and Nike debate. Which one's the cool shoes? Which ones aren't? Is it appropriate for me as the guy rocking the Pro Wings to look at the Nike guy and say, he's not as cool as me because he's got Nike and I got Pro Wings? Is that appropriate judgment? Inappropriate? Inappropriate or appropriate? Inappropriate. Okay, I look at this dude and I say, okay, he's hanging out with Joe and Joe's a loser. And so why is Joe a loser? Because I've already made a judgment on Joe. And then I'm now going to judge this guy and I'm going to say he's a loser because he's hanging out with Joe. So I want to just talk about this idea of judgment and we're going to look at Matthew chapter 7. So let's go ahead and get into the text a little bit here. And so listen to how Jesus begins this. The very first part is a command. 2 words. Judge not. Judge not. That's a command Jesus gives. So then he moves from the command, and I want you to now kind of focus on the second part of verse 1 and verse 2. We're going to read that together. So the first part is judge not. Now, let me ask you, is that pretty straightforward? Is anybody confused with that command? Judge not. And then he moves on from this it's like one of those things like, I think sometimes the Bible is easier to understand what it says and harder to apply it. I think that's sometimes the case. Like I can show you what it says, and then you're going to ask me, okay, but what is that? How do you apply that to my life? Sometimes that gets hard. But I understand this very easily. Don't judge. But then the rest of it is like, okay, we have to kind of muddle through the rest of this a little bit. So look at what he says beginning halfway through verse 1. He says, why should you not judge? That you be not judged, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. So what is Jesus doing in the second half of verse 1 and verse 2? What is Jesus doing in those 2 verses? What do you think he's doing? What does he mean by those 2 verses? What do you think about the possibility that he's issuing a warning here? Look at that for a second. Go ahead and look back at verse 1 and look at verse 2. Do you think Jesus is issuing a warning? What is the warning he's issuing? I think he's issuing a warning. What do you think? What is the warning he's issuing?
Judge as much as you want to be judged.
Okay, so judge as much. Say that again.
Judge as much as you would be judged.
Okay, so you're going to be judged how you're judged. Okay, so what does that mean? How is that a warning? So let's ask this question. Let's go back to my Pro Wings Nike debate. So I told you that I was under the misconception of thinking Pro Wings were the cool shoes growing up. But that was my conception. I thought that was the cool shoes. But what if someone who's rocking the actual cool shoes, the Nike, looks at me with my Pro Wings and he mocks me, he ridicules me? Now, I might think, well, that's a mean thing to say. But if I'm judging him based off of his shoes and he's judging me based off of my shoes, is there a sense of kind of fairness to that? You guys, this is an old school movie. How many of you guys have watched the Rocky movies with Sylvester Stallone? Right? You seen those movies? And in those movies, there's a scene in Rocky 3. So in Rocky 3, it's a tough one. I cried in Rocky 3. I don't know if I cried in Rocky 4 also. I did not cry in Rocky 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. That was a bit of a joke, but nobody got it. Okay. But so in Rocky 3, Rocky loses his trainer, right? His old trainer, Mick, dies. So he has to be trained by his old enemy, Apollo Creed, to fight this bad dude, played by Mr. T, right? Clubber Lang. He's going to be fighting Clubber Lang. And Rocky's kind of lost his mojo. And so his enemy, who was before his enemy in Rocky 1 and 2, he's going to take Rocky and he's going to get him back in the gym and he's going to get him just kind of, back to the basics. And so he takes along with Rocky, Rocky's brother-in-law. Anybody remember his name? Old people, you can answer that. Because the younger ones might not know it. What's Rocky's brother-in-law's name? Really? Polly. All right. Polly, right? So he takes Polly with him, and Polly's kind of this brash, kind of a jerk, kind of a jerk guy. And so they go into this gym with his trainer. His new trainer is African-American. He goes into this African-American, and this gym is all African-American. And Polly, again, he's not the best guy in the world. He looks around and he tells Rock, I don't like these kind of people. And he means it in the way that sounds. And Rock says, maybe they don't like you none neither. And you know what Polly says to Rock? What'd I ever do to them? What'd I ever do to them? There's no reason for them not to like me, even though I came in and I saw them and I said, I don't like them. But the truth of the matter is, that's the kind of judging that's happening here in this, he's warning against, right? Look at what he says. Judge not. Why not? So that you're not judged. For with the kind of, I'm going to kind of use my own translation here. For with the type of judgment, the kind of judgment that you judge, that's how you're going to be judged. When we walk around our schools and we look at people who don't seem cool, who don't seem in the in crowd, or maybe they're the in crowd and we don't like the in crowd. And we judge people based off of things. It begs the question, do we want them judging us in that same way? Do we want to be like Polly, who comes in and says, I don't like these people, Rock. What'd they ever do to you? What did I ever do to them? Sorry, I said it wrong. What did I ever do to them? So there is this call here, the standard here of judging. He says, don't judge that way. Now, why not? Why should you not judge? And really, he's warning them, again, because with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Do we judge others? Do we judge others, guys, at times? I mean, my wife and I, we're old now. And there's times where, she's not old, I'm old. But I think she's still in her 20s. But there's times in our life where we will, I hate to even tell you this, but we will look at something on the outward appearance and we will say something judging in a way, and we will catch ourselves frequently, hopefully as we get older. I'm 54, I should do this better by now. But hopefully as we get older, we get to the place where we're not doing this as much, but we'll both say, that was awfully judgmental of me. And so guys, my guess is that there's times we look at people in our school, in our work, and we do judge them. And the question isn't do we judge, but I think the question is do we like to be judged? Do you guys like to be judged by others in a way that they look down on you, put you down, maybe accuse you of wrongdoing? Do you guys like that? So what is the reason behind the warning? The reason is this, because the type of judgment you use is going to be used on you. Now, I'm going to ask this question. Who do you think is doing the judging here? So you're judging. Now who's going to judge you? Who do you think that Jesus is talking about? Okay, there's only two possibilities to me. One is God is judging you, and God is going to judge you in a way that is like you judge. How many of you guys, let's ask that question. How many of you guys know that you sometimes judge people wrong, and you want God to judge you in that way? I don't want God to judge me in the way that I've been guilty of at times. So the other possibility is that others will judge you in the same way that you judge others. And either way, whoever the judgment is being done upon, none of us like the idea of being judged in that way. And yet we're sometimes and frequently we're so guilty of it ourselves. And so, Jesus had brothers, right? We all know Jesus had brothers. And how many of his brothers wrote New Testament books? You guys know this? How many of his brothers actually wrote books? Two. Who were they?
Jude and James.
James and Jude. Jude and James, right? And his younger brother James wrote this in James chapter 2, verse 13. Judgment, listen carefully, judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. Judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. I'm going to ask again. How many of you guys want people, when they look at you, to be merciful in how they judge you? Graceful in how they judge you? How many of you want God to be merciful in how he judges you? Graceful in how he judges you? Forgiving in how he judges you? And so the standard here that Jesus is saying, he begins with the command, don't judge. Well, why not? Are you telling me I can't judge at all? Well, he issues a warning real quickly. Here's why you shouldn't be judging. Because how you judge others, the standard, like, you know what, I'm going to say, I don't know how you guys feel, but I've always kind of disliked people below 6'1". If you're short, I'm not trying to be unkind. I don't like you. I probably never will. And you could come up to me, we could try to be friends, but it just probably ain't going to go well. But if you're 6'1", I'll probably like you. Okay, that's a pretty harsh judgment, right? That's the measure I'm using, though. I'm using a measuring stick, and I'm saying if you're 6'1", we could be buddies. If you're below, one of my oldest friends is here. And Randy, how are you? He's like 5'2". I think he actually played a dwarf in The Lord of the Rings. He's not here. He can't rebuttal that. But it's an unfair judgment, right? When we pull out a measuring rod, and I use the literal one, they're 6'1", and we judge someone by this, and we make a decision on who they are, on whether they should be our friend, on their character, on their actions, and the whole time we're using something unfair, and we wouldn't ever want others to judge us by that. I'd be hurt. I have some friends that are taller than me, quite a few. I'd be hurt if they said, I don't have a friend if they're not 6'3" or taller. I'm like, but I'm only 6'2". I want to be your buddy. It's an unfair judgment. Why can't I be your friend at 6'2"? I only like 6'3" people and above. So Jesus issues the command, don't judge. He issues the warning, because how you judge, you're going to be judged. And again, here's the words of James. Judgment is without mercy to the one who has shown no mercy. The next thing Jesus does here in Matthew 7 is he actually uses an illustration of improper judgment. Right? This is an illustration of bad judgment, improper judgment. Look at verse 3 and 4. Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when behold, there is a log in your own eye? What is improper in that judgment? What's going on in that judgment that's just not good? Okay, hypocrisy. How is it hypocritical?
You're nitpicking when you need broad words.
Okay, all right. This dude has a lot of stuff. You guys ever seen that movie? I'm sure most of you have. How to Train Your Dragon? I haven't seen the remake, but the cartoon version. And you remember at one point, what's the main character's name? Hiccup. You don't know Polly, but you know Hiccup. Okay, whatever. Hiccup is standing before his dad, and he's kind of like talking about what is wrong with Hiccup, right? The dad is kind of, what is wrong with me? What's wrong with Hiccup? What does his dad do? He gestures. Yeah, it's kind of the whole thing, right? Okay, Hiccup, you have all of this to work on. So here we are, and we're people. And guys, I don't know about you. Guys, I just told you that I'm 54 years old, and I'm still struggling with the judgmental aspect sometimes in my life. So you can look at me, and you can say, Nathan, you're doing really good except for this part, right? This part's kind of struggling here. And yet, while I have this whole part that I need to work on, I'm going to look and I'm like, dude, you have a single problem, but you got a bad issue going on here. Even though my whole problem is bad, you got a single thing that I'm noticing. And he even says, Jesus even uses this phrase, right? It's a speck. It is a speck. So what do you think he means when he uses the word speck? It's a small thing, right? You see something small in the life of your brother, your sister. It's a small thing. Meanwhile, you got hiccups problem going on, right? You got this whole thing going on that's bad. So this illustration, again, is of improper judgment. Look again, one more time, 3 and 4. Why do you see? Let me ask this question. If I'm sitting here, and I don't know most of your names, so I apologize, but what's your name here? Eli. If I'm sitting here and I'm like looking at Eli and I'm like, dude, he's got a speck in his eye. Man, it's hard to see a speck in his eye, isn't it? If I'm going to see a speck in somebody else's eye, I am going to have to literally put in some effort to see that small speck in their eye. I'm going to be like nitpicking them. I'm going to be like, oh, problem right there. I'm starting at the top. I'm just working my way. Oh, there's a problem. A speck is something small. It's not easy to see a speck. And yet this person that Jesus is talking about, they are able to see the speck in somebody else's eye. What does that kind of imply about that person who sees the speck? Judgmental. Anybody else?
They're seeking a problem in somebody.
They're looking for things, right? They're seeking it almost, right? Otherwise, how do I see something so small in somebody's life? How do I find this tiny speck in his eye? He says, again, look at the text one more time. Why do you see the speck, but you don't notice? But you don't notice the giant log in your own eye. And that word notice here, it means to consider something. It means to reflect on something. So you can see the tiny speck in your brother's eye, but you have this giant, huge hiccup problem in your own life, and you don't even reflect on your own problems. You don't even consider the fact that you have these giant problems in your own eye. So you see the small things in your brother's eye, but you do not give any thought to the giant log hanging out of your own eye. That's improper judgment, isn't it? That's bad judgment, isn't it? So, hypocritical judgment. That's a hard one. So Jesus here moves on from his illustration of verse 3 and 4, right? Here's the illustration of improper judgment. Then he says in verse 5, you hypocrite. Well, that's what we just said, right? They're being hypocritical. You hypocrite. First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So Jesus is teaching on judgment in Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 and following. And I want to ask the question, what is he actually teaching on judging? What is he actually teaching? I know I told you I started with my dad. Okay, what is he actually teaching?
My interpretation is, be sure to work on yourself first and foremost, and then when you are cleared up of this issue, you can help somebody else with the same issue.
Okay, first work on that whole hiccup problem that you got going on, right? Work on that, and then what did you say?
Help the other person with a similar problem.
And then you can help somebody else. And so it's interesting, right? Because Jesus uses, again, I was going to write on a whiteboard, but I forgot. We don't have a whiteboard. All right, so listen, what is Jesus actually teaching? First of all, personal accountability. Personal accountability. You have a problem in your own life. You need to take care of it. And then he actually says, again, verse 5, look at this. First, take the log out of your own eye. So Jesus is teaching regarding judging, personal accountability, and here's the other thing he's teaching, brotherly responsibility. Personal accountability and brotherly responsibility. Now, why do I say brotherly responsibility? And I liked your comment. Let's see if somebody else can add to it. Why do we say brotherly responsibility? Yes.
We're called to help our brother.
Okay, we're called to help our brother. And in this case, what is it our brother needs help with? The speck in his eye. The speck. You guys remember the story of the rich young ruler who comes to Jesus? And he says, good master, what must I do to inherit eternal life? That's a great question, by the way. What do I need to do to inherit eternal life? That is a fantastic question. And Jesus says, you know the commandments, you need to keep them. And he rattles them off. And the young man says, I've done all of these things. Anybody remember what Jesus says to the young man when the young man says, I've done all these things? Good. That's a good thought. Possible. But he says, you lack one thing. You lack one thing. Whew, boy. If Jesus looked at me and said, you lack one thing, I'd be like, dude, I'm killing it. I'm killing it if I'm only lacking one thing, right? But if one thing is keeping me from being right with God, if one thing is keeping me from that life of righteousness, then I need to deal with that one thing. And so here we have this brotherly responsibility. Here is this person with a speck in their own eye. And so he says, first take out, so personal accountability, first take out the log of your own eye, then brotherly accountability. Then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. How effective are we at helping others deal with sin when we're blinded by our own sin? You see, that's what Jesus is talking about here. Jesus says it's hypocritical. Until we first take the log out, we can't see properly, and we can't make proper judgment. So I want to talk for a minute about what Jesus is not teaching. What is Jesus not teaching in Matthew 7, 1 and following? Yes?
Don't judge altogether.
He's not teaching we can't judge, is he? He is not saying there is no place in your life for judging. He's not teaching that. He is also not teaching that disciple of Christ is to overlook the sins in their Christian family. He's not teaching us, guys, when you see a problem, he's not teaching us to ignore that problem. What he is actually teaching us then is this. Number one, don't be hypocritical. Don't be hypocritical in how you judge. Number two, he's teaching us that we need to be concerned for others. And so righteous judgment is what? Again, not hypocritical. Righteous judgment is based on concern for others. And something else that I want to talk about here that we're going to leave Matthew 7 for a second in. But righteous judgment is not based off of preferences or opinions. And I think this is a big one because we have preferences, we have opinions, and there's times we make judgments of people based off of that. Because he's not rocking the pro wings. I make a judgment based off of the fact that he is not doing what I prefer. It's my opinion, my preference. So I want to go to Matthew chapter 15 real quick to show you something that I think is interesting and applicable. Go to Matthew 15. Look at what Jesus says here, Matthew 15, beginning in verse 1. Then Pharisees and scribes came to Jesus from Jerusalem and said, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders? For they do not wash their hands when they eat." He answered, "Why do you break the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition?" What are the disciples accused of breaking? A tradition, right? A tradition. This isn't God's word. So many times we judge people based off of preference, opinion, tradition. And so here they are, they're trying to judge the disciples of Christ based off of tradition, right? But we need to be very careful when our judgments are based on human opinion or human preference. Let me ask you this. Are breaking men's tradition a log or a speck or nothing at all? Okay, I mean, so I'll get in trouble for this one with Bear Valley. But the church I come from is a farm town in California. And when we go before worship, we go to the back where all the men come to pray before we come out to lead in worship. And across the board, most of the time, every guy in there is wearing boots, either work boots, cowboy boots, and jeans. That's the personality of that church. That's the personality of that area. It is an agricultural area. That's what people wear when they go there. But there's opinions, right, that sometimes, hey, you know what? Where's your jacket? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, guys. Please don't misunderstand me. I think the churches, often fit the personality of the city and the area, and I think that's appropriate. But I am trying to say this. There are times we make judgments based off of preference, opinion, tradition. And we have to be real careful with that. We have to be real careful with that because that's not the kind of teaching, that's not the kind of judgment we are to make. Jesus turns the table on his accusers and he states that they are guilty of breaking the command of God. Why were they breaking the command of God? For their traditions. Look at what he says in verse 3. So they accused him of breaking the traditions of men. Look at verse 3. He answered them, why do you break the commandments of God? Is the commandments of God a log, a speck, or nothing? That's a log, right? You're breaking the commandments of God, and you're okay with that, all the while you're trying to bind on others something that is nothing. I can't even call it a speck. You're judging others based off of this, while the whole time ignoring the fact that you are breaking God's command. And so again, as we kind of tried to make an application for this morning, we have to be sure in our judgment that we don't treat preferences, opinions, human tradition as the commands of God. We have to be very careful with that. So how do we apply this to our own lives? First of all, consider your life for a second and the mercy or grace you give others. Think about your relationships at school. Are you gracious to those who aren't in your crowd, whatever your crowd is? Are you gracious to them, merciful to them, forgiving to them? And then we also have to consider not only our own, life, right? We have to consider how am I doing in my walk? Do I have a log in my eye? Do I, there was I have my family was a really big family. My dad was one of 14 kids, and so I don't even know how many cousins I have. I really do lose track. I don't know. A lot of cousins. And my family was raised in the Church of Christ, and so very, traditional and conservative family. And one of the cousins in my family group was struggling in life and left the church, became very bitter against the church. But she found out that another one of the cousins was attending what she said was a liberal Church of Christ. And so she was openly tearing down this other cousin who attended a liberal Church of Christ. All the while, she has left the church entirely, abandoned morality, and was living for self. You see, she had a hiccup problem, and she was looking at somebody else and saying, you're going to a liberal Church of Christ. I don't know if that church was liberal or not. I'm not trying to speak to that. I'm trying to speak to this, that we need to first look at our own life. I need to be real careful in judging others when I have a log in my eye, when I have a sin in my life. And so Jesus then calls us, right, to have this responsibility. First, take the log out of my eye. Second, be merciful in your judging of others. We want mercy to be given to us. And the third thing is, when a brother needs help, we have that brotherly responsibility. We have a brotherly responsibility, a sister responsibility. Why are we doing that? Why are we judging them? Why do we see the sin in their life? Why are we going to approach them? It's not because we're trying to show that we're better than them. We're coming to them because we love them, because we see a problem and we're just trying to help them. One text, one more time before we wrap it up. Go to Galatians chapter 6. And I want to read just the first verse of Galatians chapter 6, because I think it's appropriate here. He says, brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness, keeping watch on yourself, lest you too be tempted. Is there a responsibility that we have to help our brothers and sisters when they have that speck in their life? You see, there is that responsibility, isn't there? So guys, real quick recap. Judging of others is based off of God's word, not our preferences, not our opinion. We are to do so with mercy and grace and forgiveness only after we have evaluated our own walk, our own struggles. And I'm going to wrap it up there. Do we have time? Should I take questions? Are we done? Or?
Come on, 5 minutes.
Okay. Do you guys have any questions or thoughts you guys would like to add? Yes.
It was verse 5, I'm pretty sure. It says, and first take the log out of your eye, and it says clearly, the speck in your brother's eye. The word clearly
Mm-hmm.
And he used an analogy that fits kind of a lot of things, but it fits this. When you want to know about water, don't ask a fish. And what I got from the analogy was they don't know any different. You know, if I looked at Braden and I said, and I could see the differences from Braden and Jace because there are two different things. But now if everyone looked the same, how would I describe them? We don't know any different. We can't compare it to something else. So if you have a log in your eye and you're living in a world of sin and you're around sinful people, you won't notice what you've done wrong. But when you take the log out of your own eye, you see things differently because now there's a difference. And that's how you can see the clear speck in your brother's eye.
We have to have that responsibility, don't we? Personal accountability. First take. Okay, good. Any other comments, questions before I give it back to Brett or whoever I'm giving it back to, Sage? All right, guys, thank you for your attention. Thank you for your participation.